Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless Official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. It was supposed to be an ordinary night. The wind howled outside, brushing the rain against the cracked windows of the old factory, but inside, darkness swallowed every corner. The faint flicker of a broken bulb revealed Sienna's trembling face as her voice broke through the silence. "Matt, please, don't do this." Her words were barely audible, trembling between fear and disbelief. Bound to a chair, her hands were raw from trying to escape. Matt's shadow hovered over her, no longer the man she once trusted, but someone unrecognizable, consumed by obsession and hatred. His cold smile sent chills down her spine as he stepped closer, the smell of gasoline and rust filling the air. "You ruined everything," Matt hissed, pacing back and forth like a predator. "You and that golden boy, Nick. You think you can just walk away from me?" His voice cracked with rage. Sienna's tears streamed down her face, her hands trembling over her swollen belly. She was terrified, not just for herself, but for the fragile life inside her. She had just found out she was pregnant, and the timing couldn't have been worse. She had been planning to tell Nick that night, about their baby, about the future she dared to imagine. But now, here she was, staring into the eyes of a man who had already taken too much from her. "Please, Matt," she begged again, her voice breaking. "I'm pregnant, please, don't hurt me." But her words only ignited his fury. His eyes darkened, and a twisted grin spread across his face. "Pregnant? His baby? You think that changes anything?" He slammed his fist into the wall beside her, the sound echoing like thunder. Sienna flinched violently, her body tightening in panic. "You took everything from me, Sienna, every chance I had, every ounce of control. You made me a fool." Meanwhile, across town, Nick was pacing his apartment, dialing Sienna's number over and over. She hadn't shown up for dinner. She hadn't answered his texts. Something was wrong, he could feel it in his bones. He tried to convince himself she was just late, but the unease gnawed at him like a beast. When her voicemail picked up for the 5th time, his heart dropped. Then, suddenly, a message notification buzzed on his phone. His breath caught, a single text from Sienna's number, "Help me." Nick's world froze. He called the number back, but there was no answer. Panic took over. Within seconds, he was out the door, his car tearing through the rain-slicked streets. He knew exactly who was behind it, Matt. The same man who'd been stalking Sienna, the same man who refused to accept that she had moved on. He had promised her that Matt was done, that he'd never hurt her again. Now, that promise felt like a cruel lie. Back at the warehouse, Sienna's cries filled the air. Her voice was raw, desperate, echoing off the cold concrete walls. "Please, Matt, you're scaring me. I'm begging you, don't do this." She struggled against the ropes, her wrists bleeding. Matt's laughter was unhinged as he circled her, taunting her with memories of what they once were. "You think you're better than me now? You think he loves you more than I ever did?" He grabbed her by the chin, forcing her to look at him. "You're mine, Sienna. You've always been mine." "Don't touch me," she screamed, twisting away. But his grip tightened. His rage boiled over, and in one violent motion, he shoved her back, too hard. She stumbled, her chair tipping, crashing against the floor. Pain exploded through her body as she hit the ground. Her breath hitched. And then, horror struck, a sharp, unbearable pain surged through her abdomen. Her eyes widened as the realization set in. "No, oh God, no," she gasped, clutching her stomach. Matt froze. For a moment, even his fury faltered as he saw the pain twist across her face. But instead of helping, he backed away in shock. This is your fault," he shouted, his voice shaking with denial. "You made me do this." Sienna's cries turned into sobs, her body shaking uncontrollably. "Please. I need help," she whispered weakly, her voice fading. Blood stained the floor beneath her, and the horror of what was happening hit her all at once. She was losing the baby. Miles away, Nick followed the GPS ping from Sienna's phone, his heart pounding like a war drum. Every red light was a curse. Every second felt like an eternity. When he finally spotted her car abandoned near the industrial district, his fear turned to full-blown panic. He bolted into the storm, shouting her name. Sienna! His voice echoed through the night, but only the sound of thunder answered back, until, faintly, he heard it. A scream. Help me! He followed the sound, kicking through a rusted door that led into the warehouse. The smell of gasoline hit him first. Then he saw her, lying on the ground, pale, trembling, blood pooling beneath her. Sienna, he cried out, sprinting toward her. But before he could reach her, Matt appeared out of the shadows, holding a metal rod like a weapon. You shouldn't have come here, Nick, Matt snarled. You ruined everything. She was supposed to choose me. Nick's fury ignited instantly. You're insane, Matt. You've hurt her enough. He lunged forward, blocking a swing from Matt's weapon. The two men clashed violently, fists flying, metal clanging. Years of rivalry and hatred exploded into chaos. Nick's knuckles split open, blood smearing across his hands as he fought with every ounce of strength. Behind them, Sienna groaned weakly. Her vision blurred as she tried to focus on Nick, her savior, her love. She wanted to call out to him, but her voice was gone. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she felt the life inside her slipping away. The fight raged on. Matt swung again, but Nick dodged, tackling him to the ground. You're done. Nick roared, slamming his fist into Matt's face. The weapon clattered to the floor, the sound echoing through the room. Breathing hard, Nick grabbed Matt by the collar, ready to end it once and for all. You'll never hurt her again, he growled, punching him one last time before throwing him aside. He rushed to Sienna, his hands trembling as he cradled her in his arms. Sienna, stay with me. Please, look at me. His voice cracked with desperation. She blinked slowly, her lips quivering. Nick. I tried to fight him. I didn't want to lose, she couldn't finish. Her body trembled, her pain unbearable. Nick's tears fell freely as he pressed his hand to her cheek. You're going to be okay, baby. I promise. I'm going to get you out of here. He pulled off his jacket and pressed it against the bleeding, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Stay with me, Sienna. Please. Sirens blared in the distance, someone had heard the screams. Relief and terror mixed in Nick's chest. He could see the flashing lights outside, but he knew the damage had already been done. Sienna's sobs turned to silence as her body went limp in his arms. No, no, no. Nick cried, shaking her gently. Don't you do this to me. Don't you leave me. He could feel her faint pulse, but it was slipping. Paramedics rushed in moments later, pulling Nick back as they tried to stabilize her. She's lost a lot of blood, one of them shouted. As they lifted her onto the stretcher, Nick stood frozen, covered in her blood, his eyes empty with shock. Matt, handcuffed and dragged out by officers, sneered bitterly even as he was shoved into the squad car. She was mine, he muttered under his breath, but his voice was drowned out by the rain. At the hospital, Nick sat outside the emergency room, his head in his hands. His shirt was still stained, his knuckles bruised. The doctor finally emerged, his expression grim. She's stable, he said softly. But. I'm sorry. She lost the baby. The words hit Nick like a thunderbolt. He felt the air leave his lungs, his heart shattering in silence. He pressed his forehead against the cold wall, tears streaming down his face. Sienna had survived, but the child they'd dreamed of, the future they had whispered about, was gone. Hours later, he sat by her bedside. Sienna looked pale, fragile, her eyes filled with tears when she woke. Nick, she whispered. I'm here, he said, clutching her hand. You're safe now. She blinked, her voice breaking. The baby? Nick's eyes glistened as he shook his head. I'm so sorry. Sienna turned away, her sobs quiet but heart-wrenching. It's my fault, she whispered. I couldn't protect our baby. No, Nick said firmly, pulling her closer. This isn't your fault. Matt did this. And he's never going to hurt you again. Outside the hospital room, police stood guard, waiting to take Matt's statement once he regained consciousness. The press was already swarming, the story spreading like wildfire. Local woman kidnapped by ex, rescued by heroic partner. But for Nick and Sienna, there was no victory. Only loss, only pain. Days later, as Sienna sat in silence by the window, her hands folded over her stomach, Nick placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. We'll get through this, he whispered. I swear it. She nodded faintly, her eyes distant. He took our baby, she said softly. But he didn't take my will to live. I'll make sure he pays for everything he's done. Nick looked at her with quiet determination. Then we'll do it together. The storm outside began to fade, the first light of dawn breaking through the clouds. But inside them, the scars would remain, reminders of a night filled with horror, heartbreak, and a love strong enough to defy the darkest evil. Because even after the blood, the screams, and the loss, one truth remained: Sienna was alive, because Nick got there just in time. But the tragedy of what was lost that night would haunt them forever. The sterile white walls of the hospital did little to comfort Sienna as she lay motionless on the bed, her hand resting on the thin sheet that covered her body. The beeping of the heart monitor was steady, but her heart felt shattered beyond repair. The world had become eerily quiet since that night, the night she lost everything. Her body ached, but the real pain was buried deeper, in a place no medicine could reach. She had lost her baby. The little heartbeat she had once heard, the fragile miracle she had just begun to believe in, gone in an instant because of Matt's madness. Nick sat beside her, his fingers intertwined with hers. He hadn't slept in 2 days, his eyes bloodshot, his expression hollow. He had replayed the scene over and over again in his mind, the moment he burst into the warehouse, the sight of her bleeding on the cold concrete, the horror in her eyes. Every time he closed his own eyes, he saw it again, and every time, it broke him a little more. I should have been there sooner, Nick whispered, his voice trembling. If I hadn't wasted time. Sienna turned her head slowly, her voice soft but pained. Nick, you saved me. If you hadn't come when you did, I wouldn't even be here. Her eyes filled with tears as she squeezed his hand weakly. You can't blame yourself. But Nick couldn't let it go. I promised you I'd protect you, he said, his jaw tightening. And I failed. I didn't just lose our baby, I let that monster touch you again. His voice broke on the last word, his rage barely contained. Matt doesn't get to breathe free air after what he did. I'll make sure he rots for this. Sienna looked away, staring blankly at the rain streaking the hospital window. The city outside carried on, unaware of the destruction that had torn her world apart. He took something from us that we'll never get back, she whispered. But I can't let him take my soul too. Nick frowned, confused. What do you mean? I mean, she said, her voice gaining quiet strength, I can't let him win by making me hate him more than I love what's left of us. If I do, he still controls me. Her lip trembled as she spoke, and tears slid silently down her cheeks. But it's hard, Nick. It's so hard to not drown in the anger. Nick leaned forward, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. Then I'll help you stay above it, he murmured. We'll heal together. One step at a time. But healing wasn't going to be easy. The next few days blurred together in a haze of grief and hospital visits. Sienna barely ate, barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Matt's face, his twisted smile, his hands gripping her, the sound of her own scream echoing in her ears. The trauma replayed like a nightmare she couldn't escape. One evening, as she sat in her hospital gown, staring at the faint reflection of herself in the dark window, Nick entered the room quietly with a small bouquet of white lilies, the same flowers she'd once told him were her favorite. I thought you could use something beautiful, he said softly. She managed a faint smile. "They're perfect," she whispered. "Thank you." But when he set them beside her bed, her eyes flicked toward the TV in the corner. The news was playing footage of Matt being led into the courthouse in handcuffs. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and Matt's cold expression sent a chill down her spine. "Matt Clark has been charged with kidnapping, assault, and attempted murder," the reporter announced. Sources say his actions directly led to the loss of Sienna Blake's pregnancy. He is currently being held without bail pending trial. Sienna's breath hitched. The sound of Matt's name alone made her chest tighten. She reached for the remote and turned off the TV abruptly. "I don't want to hear his voice ever again," she said, her tone sharper than usual. Nick nodded, understanding. "You won't have to. He's done. He'll spend the rest of his life behind bars." But deep down, they both knew justice could never truly heal what had been broken. A week later, Sienna was discharged from the hospital. Nick insisted on taking her home, helping her walk slowly through the front door of the apartment they once shared. The familiar space now felt foreign, every corner a reminder of what they'd lost. The baby's ultrasound photo still sat tucked inside her notebook on the coffee table. The small baby blanket she'd impulsively bought just days before still lay folded in a drawer. As she entered the bedroom, Sienna's breath caught in her throat. The memories hit her like waves, the nights she and Nick had whispered about names, the mornings she had woken up dreaming of a future that would never come. She sank onto the bed, her hand clutching her stomach as tears spilled freely. "It wasn't supposed to end like this," she whispered. Nick sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I know," he said quietly. "But we'll get through this, Sienna. Somehow." She looked up at him, her eyes red and glistening. "You keep saying that," she said softly, "but how do you move on from something like this? How do you breathe when it feels like your heart's been ripped out?" Nick didn't have an answer. He pulled her close, holding her tightly as she sobbed against his chest. "You don't move on," he said finally. "You just learn to live with the pieces. And maybe one day, those pieces don't hurt as much." For days, the apartment was silent except for the sound of the clock ticking and the occasional storm outside. Nick stayed close, making sure she ate, making sure she slept. But each night, he could hear her crying quietly in her sleep. Then one night, she jolted awake from a nightmare, her scream piercing the darkness. Nick rushed to her side, holding her as she trembled violently. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're safe. He can't hurt you anymore." Sienna's breathing was ragged as she clung to him. "I saw him," she sobbed. "He was standing in the room, watching me. I could feel him." Nick held her tighter. "It's just a dream," he murmured, though his heart ached knowing the fear was real. "He's locked up. He can't come near you." But even as he said it, something in the back of his mind whispered that this wasn't over. Weeks passed, and Matt's trial drew near. Sienna was subpoenaed to testify, and the thought alone made her stomach twist. The trauma was still raw, but she knew she had to face him, not for revenge, but for closure. The day of the hearing, she walked into the courtroom hand in hand with Nick. The whispers of reporters echoed from every corner, their cameras flashing as they caught sight of her, fragile, yet defiant. When Matt was led in, his gaze locked on her immediately. The coldness in his eyes sent a shiver through her, but this time, she didn't look away. She met his stare, her expression firm despite the pain in her heart. The prosecutor laid out the evidence, the kidnapping, the assault, the physical trauma that caused the miscarriage. Every word was a dagger, reopening wounds she'd tried to close. When it was her turn to speak, Sienna stood trembling before the courtroom. "Matt took away the most precious thing in my life," she said, her voice shaking. "He destroyed a future that Nick and I had barely begun to dream of. But he also taught me something, that I am stronger than his hatred. He doesn't get to own me anymore. Not my fear. Not my grief. Nothing." Nick's eyes filled with tears as he watched her, this woman who had nearly died, now standing tall in the face of the man who broke her. Matt's attorney tried to claim mental instability, but Sienna's testimony was powerful. When the verdict finally came, the courtroom fell silent. Guilty on all counts. Matt's face twisted with rage as he was led away in handcuffs, shouting incoherently about betrayal and lies. Sienna didn't flinch. For the first time in months, she felt something close to peace. That night, back at home, Sienna stood on the balcony, watching the stars. The air was cool and still. Nick joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "It's over," he said softly. She nodded. "Almost." He tilted his head. "What do you mean?" Sienna took a deep breath, looking out at the horizon. "It's over for him. But for me. I still have to find a way to live again. To forgive myself. To believe that I can still have a future." She turned to him, her eyes glistening. "Do you think that's possible?" Nick brushed a strand of hair from her face, his gaze tender. "Yes," he said firmly. "Because I believe in you. And I'm not going anywhere." Sienna smiled weakly. "I don't know how I got so lucky to have you." "You didn't get lucky," he said with a faint smile. "You fought to survive. That's strength, not luck." For a long moment, they stood in silence, holding on to each other as the night carried away the ghosts of what once was. But the road ahead would be long. Over the following months, Sienna began therapy, slowly piecing herself back together. There were setbacks, nights of crying, moments of doubt, but there were also small victories. She started painting again, something she hadn't done in years. The canvas became her outlet, a way to release the pain she couldn't speak aloud. Nick supported her through every step. He watched as the woman he loved transformed from a broken survivor into someone stronger, more self-assured, and even more compassionate than before. One day, while cleaning out the drawer where she'd kept the baby blanket, Sienna sat quietly for a long time. Then she folded it neatly, tied it with a ribbon, and placed it in a box. "I'm not throwing it away," she told Nick when he found her. "I'm keeping it, as a reminder that love existed. Even if it was brief." Nick knelt beside her, his eyes soft. "And maybe one day, we'll have another chance," he said gently. Sienna